बैंक में गए पता
बैंक झंझट
नहीं पैसे
हे बरेचसे त्यांना तिकडचे नको मुंबईत वगैरे पाहिजे बरेचसे
माझं काय म्हणणं आहे, थोडं थांबू दे ना, काय एवढं काय आपलं वय कुठे झालंय.
हे बरेचसे ना तिकडे बरेच आहे. हा. तो सारखं मेसेज वगैरे करते धडके
फोन केला ना काय सांगणार
Indians आहे ना तुम्ही?
उचलायचं सांगायचं तसं तुम्ही पण मला आम्हाला पण वाटलं चिपळूणचे आहेत. See, आपके साथ भी हमारा वही हुआ.
आणि आम्हाला पण अशी ना गावची वगैरे मुलगी नको होती, कारण काय आमचं म्हणणं होतं काय एखाद्या वेळेला काहीतरी असेल दुसरं की जे
Good afternoon, friends. Today we are going ahead for a step further. We are starting our first hybrid conference. Today's session is on advanced in ophthalmology. Our first speaker for today is Dr. Chinmay Sahu. He's a vitreoretinal consultant. He has done his retina fellowship from Shankara Nethralaya, Chennai. He's an ex-consultant LV Prasad Eye Institute, Hyderabad. He's currently practicing at Sahu Eye Hospital and Jaslok Hospital. Welcome, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. And I would like to thank Kandivali Medical Association for giving me this opportunity to speak today. I must say it's a refreshing change from all the webinars that we've been doing, and to have this kind of a hybrid meeting where there's some possibility of physical interaction. When I was asked to speak in a fora like Kandivali Medical Association, it got me thinking that, what topic should I speak on? I mean, I can go on and on about my achievements, my hospitals, facilities, and all the possible advances that are there in ophthalmology. But would it really make any difference to this august audience which is present today? Well, I chose to veer a little from what was probably decided as a theme of this conference. And I'm going to be talking on implication of systemic drugs in management of diabetic macular edema. This, I feel, is the need of the hour. Like today, all of us, we must be hearing in the news that Rohit Sharma and Virat Kohli don't see eye to eye. Now, unfortunately, I would say in our practice, let's say if ophthalmologists are like Virat Kohli, then the physicians are like Rohit Sharma. Each one believes that they are the boss and they are doing whatever is right for the patient. But इसमें होता क्या है, बेचारे जो patients होते हैं वो बीच में पिस जाते हैं. So, like in the Indian team, I hope and pray that both of them find some middle path and do something for our cricket team. Similarly, at the end of today's talk, all I want to do is leave you with certain simple take-home points, which I do hope will make a difference in your clinical practice in the future. My idea here is not to overload you with too much of data, but simple situations. So, Saurabh, I think it's all right. Now, the topic that I've taken up is diabetes and its possible, implications on eye. Now, we all know that diabetes is an epidemic, and at least this is one area where we are going to beat China hands down. Isme koi doubt nahi hai. We are already going to be around 60 million odd people with diabetes by 2025. And why is this so important? Because out of this people, if you look at this, almost 5 to 8% to 40% of these patients, they are type 1 diabetic or type 2, are going to have diabetic macular edema, and this is going to affect their quality of life. And mark my words, these are going to be people in the working age group. Diabetes is slowly creeping up at younger age. And when you develop diabetic macular edema, imagine not having clear vision and having to work, having to fend for your family, having to do all the activities. I can assure you, it is a nightmare. Now, let's take up one picture out here. This is one picture that I like to show in a lot of conferences. When I was in Shankar Nethralaya, there was this posting which I was doing with Dr. Lingam Gopal, who is considered the father of vitreoretinal surgery in India. And in that surgery, one day there was a lot of halchal, a lot of activity that some hi-fi doctors are coming from Bombay. And since I was from Mumbai, I was all alert. Now, I won't take names, but in that OPD, we had two senior ophthalmologists from Bombay, one who was a general ophthalmologist, the other who was a retinal surgeon. This picture in the eye was that of the general ophthalmologist. This, my friend, is the crux of the story. This out here is diabetic macular edema. There are IRMAs. These are membranes which are forming. This ophthalmologist unfortunately had proliferative diabetic retinopathy with macular edema. But that's not the point. Point is, he didn't realize he has reached to this stage. And one fine day, he woke up to realize he's not seeing clearly. Now imagine if this can happen to an ophthalmologist who was going to a retinal surgeon for checkup. Now when the retinal surgeon saw this, he told the ophthalmologist, "Bhai, मैं तो तेरे को बोल रहा था dilated checkup करते, तू ही गाय में रहता था, भाग जाता था." So both thought they were doing right. Ophthalmologist thought, मैं तो जा रहा हूँ checkup के लिए. The guy says that I told you needed a dilated examination. Now, unfortunately, this is what happens in day-to-day life. Somewhere or the other, we all know that diabetes में यार आँख तो check कराना है. हाँ, कल कर लेंगे, परसों कर लेंगे, हो जाएगा. Then when we go to the doctor, doctor will say, "Hey, bhai, you need a dilated examination," and the patient will be like, "I have this work, that work." So unfortunately, our busy life schedules come in the way, and we land up with end-stage diabetic retinopathy, which could have been avoided. Now, this is a beautiful study. When I was trying to look at data, and I was trying to see what is the physician referral rate for a retina examination. Unfortunately, there were not many papers which were going into this. I got this beautiful paper, which is a questionnaire-based survey done in central India in a tertiary eye institute. And these patients were asked, these were like around about 200 odd patients who had sight-threatening diabetic retinopathy, and they were asked certain questions. Now look at this, glaring data. 61.7% patients were aware that eyes get affected. 60% knew that there could be some problem in the eye, but 93% of patients had never gone for regular eye checkups. What is more important, that physicians were the source of information in only 45.7% cases. Now, through this fora, this is what I want to do. In today's practice, in my OPD, at least one patient comes to me every week with either diabetic macular edema or a bleed in the eye. And when you ask them, "Were you taking your diabetic medication?" Yeah, I go to a doctor, I take my medicines, everything is going on time. But unfortunately, this patient was never told that you need an eye examination. This, my friend, happens in a city like Mumbai, in a country like India, where we are supposedly literate and we are the best doctors in the world. Yet, sometimes for some reason, some physicians maybe do not refer patients. So this is where we need to close the gap. We need 100% physicians telling patients that, listen, you can have an eye issue in diabetes, and it is extremely crucial to get the eye checkup done. I will not go again into detail, but this was a landmark paper which got published in Indian Journal of Ophthalmology, which is a consensus from the All India Ophthalmic Society talking about how you should be referring. Let's make it simple. Any diabetic patient, please ask them for the first retina examination. After that, let the doctor decide, ophthalmologist decide whether he needs an annual, a 6-monthly, a 3-monthly. Let the ophthalmologist take a call on that. Also, for gynecologists, any woman with diabetes who becomes pregnant, it is very important to have a checkup every trimester, because things can worsen dramatically in pregnancy in the retina. Now, do referred patients actually go? Although, again, it's similar to the other data. This paper again looked at this question, and they found that only 43.5% patients ever visited. So I would like to go one step further. It's just not your duty to ensure that you just say, go and show your eyes. It is also important to explain to the patient that these can happen and make the patient go. I know few diabetologists who make it a point. If you come to me next time without the ophthalmologist paper, I will not check you. This is unfortunately required. Let the patient think whether I'm commercial or I'm not. I don't think we're here to change the way we practice and suit it to patients' whims and fancies. What is right and should be done. So my take-home message is, please insist on at least once a year retina examination for diabetic patients. This looks like a simple point, but one of the most important things that we need to understand. Now let us look at a second picture. Now this is a patient with diabetic macular edema. If you look at the fundus angiography picture, there's a lot of leakage in the macular area. Now this patient is going to have a torrid time. When you go to the doctor, he's going to say, start with drops, you need injections, you need lasers. All in short, he's going to have a little bit of a visual disability. And whether he should have gone to this stage was the question. What I'm trying to do now is, there are certain ways we can deal with this situation together. Now, we all know that controlling blood sugar is important. This is a no-brainer. There are Wisconsin eye disease study, diabetes control complication trials, UK PDS. I can quote umpteen number of studies which have shown that there's an inverse relation between glycosylated hemoglobin and development and progression of retinopathy. American Diabetes Association recommends an HbA1c less than 7%. There is clear-cut evidence that incidence of diabetic retinopathy will reduce by 76% and progression reduced by 54%. This is a huge number. It is just a statistic for you, but for someone, it is his eyesight. So targeting an HbA1c of 7 is important, but here is the googly. Too rapid control of retinopathy leads to worsening of retinopathy. My friends, this is extremely crucial. It sounds like it doesn't make sense, right? On one hand, I'm saying that you need to have tight sugar control. On the other hand, I'm saying that too rapid control of retinopathy leads to worsening. And I'm tired talking to my physician friends about this. There are a lot of papers. If you look at this paper, it said that strict metabolic control works if there is no diabetic retinopathy. But once you have diabetic macular edema, so here it shows at the end, the conclusion was the macular thickness actually increased in patients where there was sudden control of diabetes. So my take home here is, when you have diabetic, please, when you're doing your blood sugar control for your patients, ask him, did you go for an eye checkup? Do you have an eye problem? Do you happen to have some vision issues? Maybe you'll open the paper, you'll realize this patient has macular edema. Now here it is not important to crash his blood sugar. It is important that you do a slow, gradual control of the blood sugar. And is it a one fit for all that every person who comes should have an HbA1c of 7? No. Whether you are type 1 diabetic or type 2, whether you've been diabetic for 1 year or 2 years or 10 years, 20 years, whether you need insulin, you don't need, what kind of vascular comorbidities do you have, whether your eye is involved, all these matter. And this beautiful paper clearly shows that there are two groups, one in which you need a less stringent control of the blood sugar. Here, if your disease duration is long-standard, life expectancy is less, you have comorbidities and established vascular complication, you need not target an HbA1c of 7 if it's already at 11. You go to probably 7 to 7.5, but you can take 6 months, a year, and do it slowly. So please remember this, my dear friends, especially to all the physicians who might be listening in this talk, that a gradual control of blood sugar is very crucial. Otherwise, macular edema tends to worsen. Now, what got me going was there are certain drugs that, diabetologists tend to use. And I was wondering that, we as ophthalmologists read that this drug can worsen diabetic, this can improve diabetic. But whenever I see the medications that patients are using, these are not among those commonly. So this table out here is just to see what physicians really do. And in less than 5 years of diabetic patient, metformin, DPP-4 inhibitors, and maybe sulfonylurea group, these are the ones which are commonly used. Now let us look at some simple points. There is this thing that thiazolidinediones, that means pioglitazone, rosiglitazone, or any glitazone can increase diabetic macular edema. Now this is debatable. A close friend of mine who's a renowned diabetologist, he kind of says, you ophthalmologists like to, badmouth pioglitazone. It's such a wonderful drug. It controls blood sugar so well. There's no evidence to prove that it worsens macular edema. well, जब husband और wife भी कोई दो चीज पे कभी राजी नहीं हो सकते, तो this is fine. There's always going to be contrasting information, but one study, the ACCORD study, which is a landmark study for physicians, it did show that there is no longitudinal association, but there is enough number of paper which shows that diabetic macular edema can be associated or worsened with glitazone use. What is known is 15 to 20% on glitazone do develop fluid retention, and these patients could have worsening of macular edema, and taking them off it could help improve the condition. So my take home here is, if you are prescribing a glitazone group to your patient, do take 2 minutes to know whether he has diabetic macular edema. And there are many other good drugs out there which can be used for sugar control. Why not just go to the other, which definitely have no proven effect or bad effect on the eye. So this is another important point. SGLT2 inhibitors. Now, SGLT2 inhibitors like canagliflozin and this particular group, they are known to improve chronic diabetic macular edema. They are known to improve the retinal microcirculation, and in fact can improve even the decrease the rate at which retinopathy progresses. So I also believe that this particular group is a great option for renal patients, and so why not consider some drugs like these which can have beneficial effect. So when you have a patient coming to you who has retinopathy, maybe these two take homes, look whether the patient is on glitazone or whether you can add a SGLT2 inhibitor can be considered. So these were my 3 simple take homes. Please do not target a very rapid control of blood sugar. Try to see if the patient is on glitazone, and if possible, introduce a SGLT2 inhibitor which has a beneficial effect on eye. Blood pressure, landmark studies which show that the tight control of blood pressure is associated with reduction in diabetic retinopathy progression. Again, when you look at the drugs, probably amlodipine is a drug of choice, or the first line drug which I seem to see in most physicians prescribing medicines for hypertension. But there is this group out here in green. These are the ACE inhibitors or the angiotensin receptor blockers. Through this fora, I want to highlight certain landmark trials like the Euclid study, which looked at lisinopril in type 1 diabetic normotensive patients. And they showed that it decreased the progression of diabetic retinopathy by 50%. Enalapril, the RAS study, the renin-angiotensin study, looked at enalapril and it looked at losartan. And this showed that a night ambulatory diastolic BP was associated with increasing severe retinopathy. And the protective effect of ACE inhibitors and angiotensin receptor blockers was due to the effect on BP at night. This particular group, the ACE inhibitors and the angiotensin receptor blockers, definitely have a beneficial effect on retinopathy. So if your patient has a retinopathy and he has hypertension, rather than just starting as directly on amlodipine, maybe a thought can be given to considering an ACE inhibitor or an angiotensin receptor blocker. There are other such studies, the Direct Prevent 1, Protect 1, Protect 2, that looked at candesartan. Now, we won't go into details of any of these, but the simple take home is, please consider an ACE inhibitor or an angiotensin receptor blocker because they can have some beneficial effect on diabetic retinopathy. And it's also important to remember that reduction of BP is more important. Though I'm saying that, yes, this particular group, it doesn't matter if the patient has high blood pressure and you want to give something else, give, because eventually that will also matter. And BP levels of around 140 to 180 is what should be aimed for to reduce the risk of diabetic retinopathy. Dyslipidemia. Now, this is another particular group. I think practically almost all patients who have increased lipids are on either simvastatin, atorvastatin, and these particular groups. Now, I just wanted to highlight that fenofibrate. There are studies like the FIELD study or the ACCORD study, which have shown that the addition of fenofibrate has a 40% decrease reduction in diabetic retinopathy progression. So again, if you have a patient with dyslipidemia, maybe you could consider, I don't know, for some reasons, physicians don't like fenofibrate, but if it's possible to add it, it could have a beneficial effect on retina, especially if you have the picture like I showed where you have hard exudates, which are nothing but lipid-filled macrophages at the macular area. It could have some beneficial effect on clearance of these hard exudates. So again, this was a take home. Microalbuminuria. So if you have patients with diabetes, please get a urine for microalbumin because that is found to be a remarkable marker for retinopathy. In fact, people with microalbuminuria have a twofold higher risk of diabetic retinopathy, and those with macroalbuminuria have a 6 times higher risk. So maybe get a patient looks fine, sugar control is good, everything is fine. Just get a urine for microalbumin done, and if there is something happening there, maybe again you need to refer to a nephrologist for sure, but maybe an ophthalmologist also. Anemia, again, it's common sense. Any hypoxic condition can worsen retinopathy, and it is important. You know, I know for sure that most of the ophthalmologists do not even look at the blood reports other than the blood sugars and the cholesterol levels and all that. But if you see a person who's worsening with diabetic retinopathy, you'll be shocked to see quite a few percentage of these patients have poor hemoglobin levels. And men with anemia have a 2 times risk of developing diabetic retinopathy. So please also look at anemia closely. Now, I will skip these parts because these are not for this audience, but there are drugs which are now being under study, which probably got shelved also. Some may come out, which could possibly reduce diabetic macular edema in the future. Just another simple area which I wanted to highlight in this forum, because maybe a lot of physicians could be listening to this. Another common situation that I see, patient has cataract surgery, has come to us for an opinion on that. We have said go ahead with the cataract surgery. Patient does the blood test and then goes to the physician. Now, what is the ideal blood sugar level for cataract surgery? This might be a bit of a digression, but because physicians are here, maybe I wanted to highlight this simple point. Now, is there a cutoff? You'll be surprised to know that even our body has no clear guideline. The All India Ophthalmic Society says fasting less than 140, postprandial less than 200. Vision 2020, which is a big group across the world, which gives recommendations on cataract surgery and other things, again says 140 and 180. But there are contrary opinions. There are opinions like Japanese Ophthalmic Society follows a glycosylated hemoglobin, and less than 10 is what they look at. And there are papers, especially coming from Japan, that show that serum glucose level had no influence on the perioperative clinical conditions. Now, we all know a high blood sugar is bad, but how is it? It can decrease the wound healing. Maybe in the post-op period, patient may have more of foreign body sensation, irritability in the eye. Sometimes, yes, unfortunately, if your patient has that 1 in 1,000 risk of developing endophthalmitis and has a high blood sugar, it might worsen and getting it under control might be difficult. But what I want to drive home out here is that rapid control of blood sugar is not advisable. You target a good control of blood sugar, I leave it to you. But do not crash the blood sugar again suddenly. And what do we mean by rapid control? If the HbA1c decreases by 0.5% to 1% within 1 month, there is an increased risk of worsening of retinopathy. So if you have a diabetes patient coming for cataract surgery, look at the grade of cataract. Like the picture I showed, which was a mature cataract. Really, there's no point waiting in this situation. The patient anyways is seeing nothing. But if you have a patient with an early cataract who can wait and there is a high blood sugar, bring it down, but do it gradually. Don't crash the blood sugars. Now, again, why does it progress? Basically because the body or the eye has got used to receiving oxygen at a certain level. And when you suddenly crash the blood sugars, it kind of creates an hypoxic situation in the eye and can worsen retinopathy. I will quickly just cover 2 points. There are a lot of physicians who call up, "Arey sir, ye kaun sa injection aap bol rahe ho? Kya hai, kya nahi hai?" Since the topic was advances in ophthalmology, one quick point. Intravitreal anti-VEGF injections are becoming quickly the prime or one of the main ways of dealing with diabetic macular edema. There are gold standard drugs which have been there for a lot of time, like ranibizumab, bevacizumab, and there are newer drugs like aflibercept. Now, which one to use is not actually something that we need to discuss in this fora, but what is important is sometimes I have patients coming to me and they're like, doctor ने बोला injection तो ऐसे ही आपका डॉक्टर बोलता रहता है, कुछ काम का नहीं. Sir, please don't spread this kind of information. अरे नहीं यार, वो इतना 4 इंजेक्शन लगेगा, 5 इंजेक्शन लगेगा, तेरा आंख तो वैसे ही कुछ फर्क नहीं गिरेगा. See, it's nice to look like a hero in front of a patient and it's nice to say that कुछ तेरे को जरूरत नहीं है. पेशेंट को भी अच्छा लगता है, ये डॉक्टर सही है, इसने बोला कुछ नहीं करना है. But is it the right thing? Please look at data, look at science. Maybe an injection is not the panacea of all evils, but there is enough scientific literature which says that in addition to good lifestyle, that means good dietary control, good exercise, all that is obviously important, but intravitreal anti-VEGF injections have a clear beneficial effect for diabetic macular edema. And please do not just discredit them because you have seen certain patients where it did not work. Yes, it may not work for all, but if given the right treatment and a teamwork, it starts showing its difference in the eye. Other than the drugs, I will again not go into details of the drugs. There are lasers that can be done. And in our, often a lot of doctors say, "Arey laser to bas abhi, there is no need. We have injections." Well, there's no one size fits for all. And in certain situations, once you've lowered the macular edema with the use of anti-VEGF injections, like in this situation where a laser was done, the edema has actually subsided over a period of time. So lasers are also something that we can do. And anyways, surgeries are a last option. In certain situations where nothing is working and you have membranes forming on the retina or a taut posterior hyaloid, releasing that can actually help these patients. Now, the idea of this talk was just to highlight the first few points that I stressed. And I'm hoping through this that certain physicians will look at the patient's eye condition and maybe titrate their medications to kind of give a beneficial effect to the patient. So as we are hoping that one day Kohli and Rohit Sharma get together and take Indian team to have some gold standards, we also look forward to tying up with physicians in a fruitful manner for better control and management of diabetic retinopathy. Thank you for your patient hearing. Anyone would like to ask any questions? I'm more than happy to take it up.
Any questions you can
Thank you, Dr. Thank you, Dr. Chinmay. This was an excellent session on macular edema with many take-home messages. And the one which we need to ensure is we have to refer every diabetic patient to a retinal specialist at least once in a year. Our delegates attending this session online can keep posting questions which would be taken in the end with audience interaction. I feel proud to introduce our second speaker, my batchmate from KEM, Dr. Saumil Sheth. He's a practicing ophthalmologist specializing in retina, LASIK and laser eye surgeries. He has done retina fellowship at the prestigious LV Prasad Eye Institute. His work experience includes more than 15,000 eye surgeries and laser procedures, with more than 1,500 of these performed abroad as a fellow retinal surgeon at Sydney Eye Hospital, Australia. He is currently working at his own founded 10-year-old super specialty Envision Eye Hospital in Mumbai, which also serves as an epic state-of-art referral eye care facility for complex eye procedures, including retinal surgeries, corneal transplants, and difficult cataract surgeries. Welcome, Dr. Saumil.
A very good afternoon to you all. And thank you, Jaisal, for the very kind introduction. I think I'm going to take it ahead from what Dr. Chinmay has just spoken. I would like to speak more about other retinal diseases other than just diabetic retinopathy. But I would like to address a very pertinent issue that is plaguing all of us these days, is computer age childhood myopia. All of us are concerned very much about our kids. And this issue needs to be addressed a little bit in more detail. So I'm going to take a little bit of a tangent from retinal diseases and how this very concept, computer age childhood myopia, comes back to having retinal problems. And then I'm going to go on to discussing retinal diseases. So my topic for today is the silent killers of sight. But I'm going to be screaming about these silent killers. So hold on. So this is not. So I do not want this actually to be a monologue. I do not know how you all can interrupt and ask me questions. But if at all you all have a doubt at any point in time, I would not like to keep on bragging on. I would like to answer those doubts. I'm going to, like what Dr. Chinmay did, he presented clinical pearls. I'm going to be doing something similar. I'm going to be using a few myths and converting them into facts. Because I feel that the only thing worse than knowledge is misinformation. And the only thing worse than misinformation in today's times is misinterpretation of that. And we have nothing but Google to blame for it, considering the info overload that it gives. So if I have to start with a basic concept, we all know how a camera is and we concentrate on the focusing mechanism, the optics and the shutter. But we all also talk about the digital sensor of the camera. We talk about 12 megapixels, 24, 36 and so on. Similarly, in the eye, a lot of people do concentrate on the iris, lens and the cornea, and for them that is the world. But a lot of people do not see the retina, which is actually like the film of the camera. And when I talk about retina, I'm going to demarcate the eye into two compartments. The posterior compartment, which also has the optic nerve. I think Dr. Sushil is going to talk about that. And a lot of people, a lot of talk is mainly based on the tip of the iceberg. If you see this demarcation line, everyone talk about, I would like to call it iceberg rather than iceberg. A lot of people talk about cornea, glasses, LASIK and so on and so forth, ocular surface, dryness, computer vision syndrome. A lot of people talk about lens, presbyopia and cataract, but hardly ever people talk about retina as well as glaucoma, simply because if you see, this part is the seen part of the eye. We can all see it. This is the unseen portion of the eye. More importantly, this portion is the shouting portion of the eye. Whenever a person has a problem with the anterior segment, it shows patient has symptoms. He will talk to you about it. What is brewing underneath, this is normally the silent portion of the eye, where a patient may be symptomless most of the times. The other important thing is most of the diseases of the anterior segment are reversible. Cornea you can change, do a transplant. Lens you can change, put an artificial lens. Iris also, for that matter, you can reconstruct. But retina, once it is damaged, you really cannot do anything about it. The same applies with the optic nerve. The other important aspect is anterior segment requires basic training in in normal ophthalmology curriculum. This requires glaucoma, retina, and so on, requires a specialized fellowship. So the first myth that I'm going to actually bust is too much of TV, laptop, mobile damages one eyes. I mean, this is very commonly spoken about. Yes, definitely too much of TV, laptop, tablet, mobile causes computer vision syndrome, eye fatigue, headache, dryness, etc., what we call as computer vision syndrome. But it is not irreversibly damaging. It is going to cause you eye fatigue, but it's not going to damage your eyes permanently unless you are less than 12 years old. So computer vision syndrome has everything in its symptomology. You have eye fatigue, itchy eyes, dryness, blurred vision, double vision, headache, but it's not going to be permanently damaging unless you are a child less than 12 years of age, wherein it causes myopia progression, an issue that has become an epidemic now, and it is plaguing all of us. So when people say the apple of my eye, and eye is the window to our world, what they actually mean is this apple and this window is what they are talking about. And as Mahatma Gandhi said, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. In today's time, what applies more is an iPad for an eye makes the whole world blind. This is the dictum that should be followed. Everything in excess is opposed to nature. Considering our Zoom meetings, online classes, and everything is becoming online, and we are practically 24 hours on the computer. Everything in excess didn't even spare these guys. I do not need to mention who these guys are. They were exercise buffs. And my wife keeps telling me, Saumil, if you don't exercise, you're going to die at the age of 55 or 60 of a heart attack. I said, if I do not exercise, I'll die at 55, 60 accepted. But if I do, then I'll probably die at 45. So it's very clear that too much or excess of anything is going to cause problems. Another myth, before I proceed on to myopia progression, carrot juice is very good for preventing myopia progression. Where did that come from? God alone knows. Vitamin A from carotene is good for conjunctival epithelium health and responsible for forming the functional pigment in the rod cells, responsible for night vision, no known role in preventing myopia progression. This is the latest fad, especially on Amazon. Blue blocking glasses or UV glasses are best to prevent myopia progression. You make all your kids wear them and their eyes are going to be just fine. Our cornea and natural lens are inherently adapted to filter most UV and bad blue light. In fact, some blue light is essential for us during daytime for cortisol-induced wakefulness and alertness. UV or blue blocking light, yes, if you're doing a lot of nighttime screen use, it is good because you want to suppress cortisol and increase melatonin production that is responsible for our sleep. So when you have this visible spectrum of light, you know that if you have a particular wavelength that you put as a filter in your glasses, all wavelengths short of that are going to get absorbed. All wavelengths that are longer than that are going to get transmitted. For the same reason, we have three varieties of blue blocking. 30%, which is practically clear or has a slight purple tint. I'm going to go back to this diagram. Purple is somewhere over here. So it blocks only around 380 to a little bit of blue in the daytime to have that wakefulness state. 50% green or yellow tilt. Evening use good because it blocks, again, as I told you, if you have something in the green yellow area, it's going to block all of this. Evening time, it's good. But if you turn on night mode on your mobile phones, it does exactly the same job. So this is also not that important. 100% blue blocking or orange red in this spectrum, which practically blocks all of the blue-green light, it is good in patients with migraine, depression, anxiety, stress, and seasonal affective disorder. This is where blue blocking helps the most. So this is a big myth. Children buying a lot of blue glasses on the internet, it's not going to be of any use to them. The other important myth, wearing glasses regularly will prevent myopia progression. Wearing glasses regularly is merely the treatment for blurred distance vision in myopia and does nothing to prevent myopia worsening. A lot of moms come with kids and tell me कि मेरा बच्चा तो 24 घंटा चश्मा पहनता है, फिर भी उसका नंबर क्यों बढ़ रहा है? So myopia in children, this is myopia where the rays converge before the retina. If you give them glasses, that is this diverging lens, it is going to focus the rays on the retina and does nothing to prevent myopia progression. So how is a lot of laptop use actually associated with myopia progression? Now we come to the causative part of it. So as the famous saying goes, all work and no play gives Jack a dull eye. So if you're seeing at a distance, the lens needn't to focus a lot of these rays because they are more or less parallel and they converge sharply on the retina. But if you are doing a lot of near work, the rays are diverging, you need an excess bulging or a convex lens to actually focus them on the retina. And this bulginess is provided by a mechanism which is called accommodation. And it is the fatigue of this accommodation where the lens cannot bulge more beyond a certain point in time. The rays which are diverging, instead of converging on the retina, will converge behind the retina. Now the body sees that, Baba, I cannot make the lens work more. I have to adapt somewhere else. So what does it do? It increases the axial length. And the moment it increases the axial length, when you're looking at a distance object, along with a relatively thicker lens, which converges faster, you have these rays converging in front of the retina. Now, this is a vicious cycle. The more near work you do, the more the lens will get fatigued, the more the rays will converge behind and the eyeball will keep on bulging behind. So in a bit to compensate for excess near work, your far work gets compromised, and that is how you have myopia. So how can I halt myopia progression? I just busted one myth. Use glasses regularly. Yes, it's a treatment, but it will not halt myopia progression. Close work, as much as you're going to avoid close work with so much of online schooling and with kids confined to their homes, this is how you project anything that you're doing close to a distance of more than 1 meter or at least 3 feet. Like project laptop or tablet to TV via an HDMI cable, or using your Wi-Fi wireless internet or an external Wi-Fi, whichever means you know of. This is a demo video here. This is my daughter actually having some content on her mobile, which I don't think I can play this. Okay, I don't think the video is playing. Anyway, you get the gist of it. There's a mobile here. She's projecting it onto the TV, which is more than 1 meter apart. And this is how you do it. This causes no accommodation fatigue. You don't have to make your lens extra bulgy because the rays are not diverging anymore. They are from a distance. They will converge sharply on the retina rather than behind, and your eyeball will not expand more. So you're breaking that vicious cycle. So the second remedy, use bifocal or multifocal glasses. Now, a lot of parents come and say, "Bhai, bachche boode nahi ho gaye. They are not above 40. Why should they use bifocal or multifocal glasses?" Multifocal and bifocal are of various types. You have distance near, distance intermediate near, and so on. And the reason why you should use them is when you're using distance, you need a diverging lens to focus sharply on the retina. But when you're looking at near objects, you don't want the lens to go extra bulgy and get fatigued. So you supplement it with a convex lens, and this is a mechanism of using a bifocal lens. You have no accommodation fatigue, and there'll be no eyeball expansion, and the myopia will get altered. So bifocal, multifocal glasses definitely have a role. Exercises of accommodation. Again, a lot of people stress about eye yoga. When they say eye yoga, any type of eye exercise does not really reduce myopia progression. Only if they are accommodative exercises or convergence exercises, they will. Because whenever you have convergence, when you're looking at a near object, you're going to converge your eyes onto it.
I just think that it is not very.
What happened?
It is not.
Okay. Reshare. I think it's because of the mic system. I think so. If they can hear, if all, I think it's a smaller room. Can I turn off the mic and try it? So if we switch this off, then I think it will go. And if this has an inbuilt mic, I think the Zoom. So can we switch this off or turn it down completely? Yeah, it's gone, right? I think you all can hear me, all of you all. And I think the people on Zoom can also, right? Okay. So coming back to accommodative exercises, why do I say convergence? Because convergence and accommodation go hand in hand. If you're going to converge your eyes onto a near object, you're also going to accommodate. So again, these are not the, I mean, I don't think the video is going to run, but again, you get the gist of it. If you're going to move your fingers from one side to the other and going to look in that direction, that is not the exercise that is to reduce myopia progression. In fact, you bring it from a distance closer by and you keep focusing on it. That is convergence exercise. We also call it as pencil push-ups. So you make the lens more powerful here. You're basically exercising like how you do with your biceps. And because it is going to stay bulgy, because it is nice and well exercised, your rays are going to converge on the retina. They're not going to converge behind it. The eyeball is not going to grow behind. Last, most important, which a lot of people ignore, and probably it's not, I don't think it is highlighted that much by ophthalmologists, but plays a huge role, is the use of atropine eye drops. Now, why this is not very popular? Because a lot of people use the common strengths available in the market are 1% and 0.5. These strengths will actually cause gross pupillary dilatation and they'll paralyze the ciliary muscle completely. A person loses accommodation, cannot concentrate on near work, and this goes into disrepute. What I'm trying to highlight is the 0.01% concentration of atropine. Now, this is extremely important because you're not going to get ciliary muscle paralysis. You are not going to get pupillary dilatation. So how does this actually work? It's very, very intriguing mechanism. I'll show you how it does. So it tries to chemically prevent the expansion of the eyeball. There are some receptors over here, muscarinic receptors in the eye, which atropine acts upon, and it prevents, though the rays are converging behind the retina because there is fatigue of the lens, the eyeball will not grow behind. It will remain in the same place, and that is what atropine does. So how can I halt myopia progression except for using glasses regularly, which you still must. If you want to concentrate on your work, you have to use any of these mechanisms. Now, a lot of people tell me, okay, so what? Let my myopia progress. It does not matter. We have great surgeons in Mumbai and across the world. After 18 years of age, I can get all my numbers removed by LASIK laser vision correction. So this is again a very common myth. Yes, definitely you can get rid of your numbers. LASIK is a very safe procedure these days and people do it in large numbers. But one cannot change the expanded anatomy of the eye and the potential problems therein. Now I'm going to come to retina and how an elongated eye does harm to the retina, some of which may be blinding and most of which are permanent. Now, LASIK surgery for myopia, basically it's a corneal procedure. You put laser on the cornea and what it does, it flattens the cornea. It is very similar to using a diverging lens in the form of glasses just before the cornea. That is all that LASIK is going to do. It is not going to prevent this excess elongation of the eye, which I just showed you the mechanism, the vicious cycle. And this is an MRI taken of a patient who has high myopia. Not only the eyeball elongates anteroposteriorly, it also tends to outpouch either centrally or peripherally, causing what we call as staphyloma. Now, when the eyeball outpouches from behind, the sclera tends to bulge. But what about the choroid and the retina? They are not going to grow at the same rate. They are going to remain of the same size. So what will happen? They'll get excessively stretched. And when they get excessively stretched in the center, you get this atrophic area. Next to the disc, you get this atrophic area. And the moment you have this atrophy, you're not going to see well. This is an irreversible change. You can't undo this. More importantly, when I said the eyeball is going to expand anteroposteriorly, this is the area that is going to have the maximum strain, is going to bear the brunt of it. So you have these mid-peripheral weak areas in the retina, which are called lattice degenerations, some of which may develop holes. And you've heard of this very common and silent retinal condition. Because those lesions are in the mid-periphery, no one's going to really detect them unless you do a dilated retinal examination with a retina specialist. And in no time, you'll suddenly feel a shadow coming in front of your eye. And that is when you develop retinal detachment. So my first silent thief of sight actually is retinal detachment. The last one is glaucoma. I think Dr. Sushil is going to highlight that. So I'm going to go quickly through the other two. This has been mentioned quite elaborately by Chinmay, but I'll touch upon it just a little bit. So there are four parts in the unseen portion of the eye predominantly. You have the macula, you have the nerve, you have the vessels, and you have the peripheral retina. And all these four silent thieves of sight or killers of sight are very easy to remember. Macula, macular degeneration, optic nerve glaucoma, vessels and macula, diabetic retinopathy, and vitreous and peripheral retina is retinal detachment. So why they are silent thieves of sight? The first reason is your retina could look normal. The patient could be asymptomatic, seeing very, very well. One fine morning, he wakes up and see that his vision has gone down significantly. He waits for a few more seconds and he goes completely blind, black. So a few seconds early, you're all good. A few seconds later, you've gone completely blind. So silent thief, you could be completely asymptomatic. They are only partially reversible. As I said, retina is irreplaceable. You cannot put a lens for a retina, or you cannot put another retina for a retina. So once you lose that part of the retina, it's never going to come back to you. So this is very important, especially for people who are driving, because these are the legal limits. Forget the legal limits in India. You can't really drive with your restricted fields or with a damaged retina. Treatments, anything to do with retinal treatment costs a lot of money. Dr. Chinmay talked about injections, and you keep requiring them maybe 10s or 20s, and they are very, very expensive. So that's why I would say that they are silent thieves of sight, because they not only take away your vision, but they also take away your money. So before you develop this retinal detachment, as I told you, develop these holes in the retina, which are called tears. And these tears, there is a subtle way to detect them. As I said, always from above, there is a sign. And the subtle way to actually detect them is do not ignore these subtle symptoms. You have flashes and you have floaters. Very common symptom of a lot of people, and most of the times they're innocuous. You have these floaters, the vitreous undergoes degeneration because the vitreous is also expanding, and it does not know how to expand in a myopic eye. So it undergoes liquefaction, it moves around, giving rise to what we call as floaters. So a lot of people have it, even I have floaters. And a lot of people have it and they say it's innocuous. It does no harm to the eye, they're just there. But if there is a sudden increase in the number of floaters, or if you have them accompanied with flashes of light, please go and get a retinal examination done as soon as possible. You can just do away with lasering the retinal tear rather than undergoing a complete surgery. So this is how typically floaters look like. They appear like earthworms or cobwebs, or maybe just dust particles or mosquitoes in your field of vision. And the next moment you'll end up with either a retinal bleed or a retinal detachment. I'm going to highlight a little bit about diabetic retinopathy, not in particular diabetic macular edema. Retina can look normal. Patient may be asymptomatic. If you see this fundus, you can see blood vessels. You cannot see hard exudates. Maybe a few here, but these are hypopigmented choroidal patches. You don't see hemorrhages in the retina. This is what the retina looks in an asymptomatic diabetic patient. But there is something lurking behind in the shadows, and this is what it is. You see these stuffed off vessels. These are new vessels. These are not the original vessels of the retina. They can give way anytime, all of a sudden. You'll end up again with a bleed or a detachment. So diabetic retinopathy has many stages: mild, moderate, severe, very severe, early proliferative, late proliferative, and tractional retinal detachment. Now, I'm not going to highlight what is seen in every stage because that is not important in this forum. What I want to tell you is that you have till here completely asymptomatic. You have that just stuffed of vessels which is progressing from one step to another without you even realizing what is going on inside the eye. And the next step is blind. So asymptomatic and blind, nothing in between. You need to know this. That's why prevention for diabetic retinopathy is better than cure. They say, can diabetes make you blind forever? Definitely not. It's the ignorance behind it that makes you blind forever. So a close watch, a very regular follow-up on diabetic retinopathy patients is what Dr. Chinmay also emphasized. The simplest means is go to a retina guy or go to any ophthalmologist for that matter and get an indirect ophthalmoscopy done. You use this device. So you see these stuffed off vessels in the retina. They may not be clinically very visible or on a two-dimensional fundus photo, But when you take a cross section of the retina, you see this tuft of vessels sitting right on the disc. And this machine is called optical coherence tomography. It is very similar to the CT scan that we have in the body. It takes cross-sectional images, and that is when you see pathologies which are not easily visible to the naked eye because you see everything in 2D. So the other important diagnostic modality is this. You see that the retina here is well lasered. There are no leaking vessels apparently, but when you do a fluorescein angiography, you see that some of the vessels are leaking. These are the vessels that they're suddenly going to give way and cause retinal bleeding. So is there a sign in diabetic retinopathy? As I said, it is asymptomatic and then blind. But if there are a few subtle signs that if they are followed, you can avoid a major mishap. So there is always a sign. And the best way to note down that is by using this very simple device. You can use a graph paper for that matter available at home. It's called the Amsler grid. And you see a few lines becoming wavy, or you see a black scotomatous spot in your field of vision, you're supposed to report immediately. So do not ignore these subtle symptoms. You have clear vision on one side. This is an asymptomatic patient. You may have blurriness of vision, definitely to begin with, but this everyone would note. What about this one? You have a clear image, diabetic retinopathy, and all you do is lose contrast. You see the contrast here and you see the contrast here. You do not really have blurriness of vision, but everything appears more or less faded out. You have metamorphopsia. Your vision may be clear, but you have everything appearing wavy. There's a very common problem again with diabetic macular edema. You may see a few black spots. They may not be in the center. They may be slightly in the mid-peripheral part of your vision, but you see these scotomatous patches. The reverse of that we call as negative scotoma, where you don't see black patches, but you see missing areas in your field of vision. Your vision may be clear outside of it, but in those areas, it may be completely missing. So these are the symptoms or the mild signs you're not supposed to ignore when you have in vis-a-vis a clear picture that you see in an asymptomatic patient. So more than 40, if you're a diabetic or a hypertensive, once a year mandatory eye checkup. Do not ignore the subtle symptoms. Ophthalmoscopy is a must, preferably by retina specialist under pupillary dilatation. Tomography or a retinal scan can pick up things which a clinical examination cannot, and so does fluorescein angiography. The last silent thief of sight I would like to address before he takes over onto Sushil takes over onto glaucoma is macular degeneration. And believe it or not, we all of us age. All of us are going to have graying of hair. Macular degeneration is very similar. This is the end stage. This is what you land up with when you ignore the subtle symptoms. There's a bleed under the retina. Unlike diabetic retinopathy, where there's a bleed on the surface of the retina, this is under the retina. This is what we call as wet form or the leaking form of macular degeneration. As I said, but before that, there is always a sign. And the sign is this. You see these very lipid-like, they are lipid, but they are not at the level of the retina. They are in the choroid. And these are the spots typically called drusen's, which are precursors of the wet disease. Like this is very similar to graying of hair. Our Bruch's membrane, the pigment epithelium below the retina is going to undergo atrophy with age, and there are particles that are going to get deposited, and this can be noted upon a retinal examination. This is a dry form of macular degeneration, which can be easily noted down on ophthalmoscopy or by doing an OCT, optical coherence tomography. So to conclude, my first and the most important take-home message is what I'm screaming about is screen, screen, and screen. If you are above 40, if you have any comorbidity, you should have no hesitation whatsoever in going to a specialist. And the converse of this, if you are less than 12 years old, no screen, no screen, no screen is what I'm screaming. Thank you. If there are any questions from the audience, I would like to take them now.
Should we keep a graph paper for our diabetic patient?
Yes, this is a very, very easy way to, screen very subtle symptoms in diabetes. So if a general practitioner or a physician can have these graph papers, or even Amsler, you can tell any of your ophthal colleagues to send a few and they'll send it to you. Or even a simple grid, you get it on the internet, you Google Amsler grid, you'll get a picture of it, you take a printout of it and you show it to your patient. and let them take it home and see it every morning. It takes a couple of seconds to see it actually, and a lot of things can be picked up if you see it there. Yes.
The eye bulge can only be seen on the MRI, or there is a clinical way to appreciate the eye bulge?
So the best clinical way to appreciate the eye bulge is an increase in the numbers. You're -2 in 1 year, you go to -3, then you go to -4, you go to -5. That is how the eyeball is bulging. That is the most easy way of noting. Yes, a retinal person from inside would be able to tell you because he sees the retina thinned out. We call that retina as tessellated fundus because the choroid shows through. Even the sclera shows through. So that itself is a sign that myopia is progressing rapidly.
One observation which I had in both my kids, when my kids were younger, both of them had spectacles. My daughter was a very, very sincere girl, and she wore a spectacle very regularly. And uska chashma badde. My son is a rebellious person, refused to wear glasses. I bought about 12 pairs for him, which he used to keep throwing around and missing them, and he never wore them. And his number came back to normal absolutely. Till date, he doesn't wear his specs. In my house, my daughter blames me for her number, and my son, he says that because my brother happened to come to the US, and he said, don't put him on specs. It's okay if he doesn't wear specs, but let him do his exercises. My query to you is there a role of exercises, the eye exercises which you said, the accommodation exercises, instead of giving a number and giving spectacles to a child when he's growing, rather he do these exercises and try and get rid of the number? It's a practical experience which I have.
So it's a very important question and a very important issue. I think the biggest myth that I tried to bust here is wearing glasses in no way prevents myopia progression. It is genetically inbuilt, you're genetically programmed. Now, because you're siblings, you can't say that genetics applies only to one and not to the other. But definitely wearing the right numbered glasses in no way prevents myopia progression. What can prevent myopia progression is doing a lesser amount of near work. If you're doing exercises, it's fine. It is going to increase your accommodative power. Your muscle is going to fatigue less. You're able to pull on for more hours in front of a computer. But eventually, when your eye muscles give way and the lens becomes less bulgy, the rays are going to focus behind and your eyeball is going to grow. Now, the way it grows depends on those muscarinic receptors. And some of them may have genetically lesser number of receptors, some of them may have more. So if two people, whether they are wearing glasses or not is immaterial, but are doing the same amount of near work, 18 hours a day, let's say both doing 18 hours, both are not exercising, both will have variable amounts of eyeball growth.
My query is slightly different. It is that does exercise.
Yes.
You have checked 2 patients, you've given them numbers, both of them have got early numbers.
Correct.
Is there an option of not giving them glasses and making them do eye exercises and getting their numbers rectified by changing the size or shape of the lens with the exercise? Because that is my practical experience in my home.
So
Now, this number was given to him when he was somewhere around.
no,
9
so
years old,
I'll give you an answer. See, this is a fight between the near use of the eye and how much of muscle power you are developing. If you're going to develop very good muscle power, but your near use or close work use is still going to exceed that, your myopia is going to progress.
9 years he was in school, and at that time there was no computers and all that. You were working like you and me here.
Correct. So he was more outdoors. He was doing lesser amount of near work, and that played a bigger role in preventing his myopia progression than what is now. So you cannot do away without, if you don't wear glasses and you do eye exercises may prevent myopia progression. But wearing or not wearing glasses is immaterial. You wear glasses so as to see clearly. If you're not going to wear glasses, I'll tell you what happens is, if you're not going to wear glasses, distant objects are going to be blurred. You will do all your work from near, and that builds up the vicious cycle. So if you have to look at distance, you have to wear glasses.
No number whatsoever, not near, not far.
Yes. What was the number minus?
Yeah.
So no, you can have variants. So like how Chinmay said, one size does not fit all. You can have variable degrees of macular edema.
I'm planning on feeling guilty, you know, for one number.
Actually, they are different. Now, one is only one, other is not on you.
Yes, there is.
Please. Saurabh, this is medical legal, all right? I'm going to sue you, all of your witness, okay?
Good, at least she is there. If her husband would have been there, he could have bent that statement the whole way.
वो शांत है बेचारा. ये नहीं
नहीं, being a wife, no, being a wife's kids is a certainty. Being a husband's kids is just a belief.
That is exactly what the medical legal should.
अभी तो surrogacy भी हो गया, तो वो भी अभी now.
Correct.
I actually.
So one more question.
Yeah, sure.
When we see screen, we say screen, so there is excess of accommodation effects. So how does the accommodation reflects when you are looking at the screen differ from when you are reading books or
Same.
something?
Absolutely the
So
same.
that can also cause.
Yes. Yes. Any amount of near work. It's the duration of the near work and the distance of near work. If you're doing it at 50 centimeters, it will put lesser strain than if you're doing it at 30 centimeters. And the smaller font you read, it puts on more sort of strain on the eyes as compared to a bigger font.
So we tell children to look outside or take a break after 20,
Yes.
25 minutes.
Yeah, that's what we call as a 20-20-20 rule. I think you must have heard of it. Every 20 minutes, you're supposed to look at a distance of 20 meters for 20 seconds. 20 feet, sorry, not 20 meters.
The computer.
Yes. So when my daughter is daydreaming and the teacher complains, I usually tell them this. Papa, she's following the 20-20-20 rule.
What amount of
Not that she was boring or something.
so what amount of exercise we need?
So just regularly, every day 5 to 10 minutes is good enough. But people, what they do is, कि भाई मैं exercise तो कर रहा हूँ, अभी मैं 18 घंटा पढ़ सकता हूँ. That's not correct.
I also wanted to add to something that since the principles of economics have to be used for using the screen, laptop,
Yes.
and mobile, where you maintain your food alignment, food distance, where you prevent the consumption syndrome and related ancient things that they develop because of.
Because we say that yeah.
निकाल दो ये.
Mobile
नहीं,
order,
निकाल दो.
food stands, they are all to be used.
This is your. Right, 1 second.
Most of the regeneration that is not put on the retina and is not sufficient enough to follow.
Thank you, Dr. Somil, for some important myth-busting sessions. And our next speaker for today is Dr. Sushil Deshmukh. He is a gold medalist in MS Opthal. He is a specialist in glaucoma, micro-incision cataract surgery with keen interest in glaucoma drainage devices and congenital glaucoma. He is an ex-consultant glaucoma and cataract services at Sankara Eye Hospital and Arvind Eye Hospital. He currently is a director of Sudrishti Eye Care and Glaucoma Center, Goregaon. He is head of glaucoma department, Lotus Eye Hospital. He will guide us on management of glaucoma. Welcome, sir.
Yeah, good evening, all in one. So now we are going into a zone which has no symptoms. Okay. So we discussed a lot about pointers and how you can identify patient having symptoms and possible eye diseases. Now, glaucoma in true sense is absolutely a silent disease, except for a part of glaucoma, which is an angle closure. Only during an acute angle closure attack that a patient can have a redness or a pain. But most of the other part, 85% of the glaucomas are symptomless. That is the difficulty. Today also in India, 90% of the glaucoma cases are underdiagnosed or undiagnosed. So we don't know who is having glaucoma. That is major hindrance for treatment and stopping of progression of glaucoma. Why this happens is in early stage of glaucoma, before I go to actually the topic which was given to me was actually the recent advances in ophthalmology. So my presentation and talk is going to be on newer surgeries which have come, and we have adopted that as against to earlier. But before we go on to that, I'll just give a preview about what the glaucoma is. So in the early stage of glaucoma, what happens is the very far periphery of your vision, some small areas can get lost. Now in our everyday life, we are bothered about what we are seeing in front, and we are not really going to pick up isolated areas of visual field loss in the periphery, especially when we use both eyes together. How many of us being doctors have ever checked vision of one eye on a regular basis? We don't. But both eyes are doing job for us. We are not going to check individually whether are the vision going to be same in both eyes. That is the problem. So India, 85% of glaucoma is still undiagnosed, and emphasis is on more and more detection. How will the more and more detection happen is to know what are the risk factors, what is the population at risk for glaucoma. So these are the 7 pointers which I will enumerate. That will be the main take home message for a doctor's collection over here. So if you have a family history of glaucoma, sure shot, you are at a very high risk of glaucoma. There is 60% risk of a sibling having a glaucoma if a brother or a sister has glaucoma. And if your parents or grandparents had glaucoma, you have 40% risk of developing glaucoma. That's a huge, out of 2, 1 will get. So this is the biggest risk factor, family history of glaucoma. Second thing, high minus numbers or high plus numbers. So myopia, hypermetropia, all of that has been discussed. So when you have very high numbers, more than -4 and more than +2, the risk of developing glaucomas are higher. So anyone who is wearing big glasses is at a risk of development of glaucoma. Third, diabetics have higher risk of glaucoma. Fourth, and very important in present scenario is use of steroids. Steroids are being used for multiple of diseases, including corona and everything. Steroids on a longer term for skin diseases, for allergic conditions, all of them put a person at a very high risk of glaucoma. Then comes thyroid, then comes hypertension, and then comes having certain parameters in the eye like thinner corneas, which is of not of much a concern for this, because you will not be able to assess whether the patient has a thin cornea or not. So having said that, I now go into the further talk. So if you see at the spectrum of the diseases, what we had 15 years back was just 2 medications in the armamentarium, the beta blockers and the pilocarpine. And we used to manage the glaucoma with that. And if it is not controlled with that, patient is doomed and he will eventually go and get blind. Okay. Then later on, people started doing surgeries. There were other form of surgeries earlier. Then they went on to do filtering surgeries called trabeculectomy. Now today also 80% of the surgeries in glaucoma happen are trabeculectomy, because this remains the surgery which can address even a strong glaucoma, where the pressures are very high and you want to control the pressures. There is very safe modality of treatment, which is laser trabeculoplasty, selective laser trabeculoplasty. It selectively addresses only the drainage channels. the angle from where the fluid flows out. It just addresses that without any collateral damage. Expensive modality, but without any side effect. Only drawback is that it cannot be used in very aggressive glaucomas or very strong glaucomas or very mild to modest level of IOP reduction. But a newly diagnosed person who has a glaucoma which is mild or moderate, instead of putting a burden of lifelong medication or a surgery, this is a very good option. This remains the Europe and USA. FDA approved #1 line of treatment for a newly diagnosed open angle glaucoma patient. Here in India, for the want of cost, it is slightly less acceptable. Plus, when a patient comes to you in the clinic and you give him the laser at the first go, he's like, oh, first instance, why not? I want to try medications. देखते आगे क्या होता है. This is a human tendency. And once on the medication, they keep continuing on the medication. If they are regular with their follow-up and we pick up that they are progressing, then they become, they are going blind. The third one is the latest eyes. Then the trabeculectomies and very advanced glaucoma surgeries are with the implants. Implants in the sense we have Ahmed glaucoma valve implant, which is an import from USA. We have Indian-made implants from Orolab in Chennai. MIGS is a particular set of around. So if I have to show you on a diagrammatic depiction. So this is the open angle type of a glaucoma, wherein this angle from where the fluid flows out is open, it is not getting blocked, and so only pressure reduction is going to be sufficient. This is an angle closure type of a glaucoma, wherein there is a block which is developed in this angle over here because of the fluid collection on the back side of this. This happens because of narrow angles, especially in plus numbered people. Here the treatment modality is to create a bypass over here by a small laser, a laser peripheral iridotomy, and then control the pressure as in like a open angle. Now this part is the sclera and the conjunctiva above. All the traditional glaucoma surgeries happen in this area. Trabeculectomy, implants, everything is done on this area, and the tube will be placed on the anterior side from where the fluid drains out. Now MIGS doesn't touch this area. So we make a small entry through the cornea. I'll just show you a small video which will give you an idea. So this is a conjunctiva sparing technology. So what happens in future? See, now patients are getting diagnosed for glaucoma at the age of 30s and 40s and 45s. They have 40-50 years of lifespan remaining for them in future. If we are going to use this area now itself for a surgery, on an average 70% survival rate for 5 years. Within a span of 10 to 15 years, they might require one more surgery. They might require third surgery after 30 years. We will not be left with any space for doing surgeries. So that is why this MIGS role has come up, wherein it is minimally traumatic. It is via ab interno. That means it goes through the cornea, and from inside we are creating that MIGS surgery without touching the conjunctiva and preventing preventing the conjunctiva well in a good condition, so that can be used for bigger surgeries later on. So now there are various MIGS which were launched in the last 10 years. Unfortunately, because of our FDA being very, very stringent and non-yielding, most of them didn't make it to India. 2 of them made it, Zen and other things, and then they were withdrawn. Only one which is now having a sale in India is Glocos iStent. Cost of one single implant is 60,000 rupees. On an average, to control the pressure in any adult, patient, you need minimum 2 implants at one sitting. Within a surgery, you need to implant 2 this thing. So this is just a cost of the implant. So 1.25 lakhs just for the implant and then the surgery cost. So this becomes way too beyond reach of a general population. There will be people who can afford it, but not many of Indians. That is where now the have come up with a technology called as a gonio-assisted transluminal trabeculoplasty. So what do we do? Instead of having a self-illuminated catheter, this is a technique which is developed by the developed world, adopted in India by collaboration with 2 institutes. So the institute from where I come, Arvind, and the New York Eye and Ear Infirmary, they got together and they developed this. So from within the eye, we use this. This suture material costs us 1,000 rupees. The self-illuminated probe, which the developed countries use, cost 24,000 rupees. It is difficult again because the surgery cost goes more than 60,000, the overall surgery. How do we do this? This is how we identify the Schlemm's canal or the canal through which the fluid flows out. We open it with a small knife and then cannulate it all throughout 360 degrees. There is a small video I'll just show you. It's less expensive, easily available, and one suture, it is autoclavable. So you can autoclave and use it for many patients also. These are all the instrumentation required. If I can run this video. So this is how the procedure is done. You just blunt the tip with a cautery machine, very easily available. Make a small opening in the cornea, fill the anterior chamber with a viscoelastic, position the patient, put the suture inside and keep. Then you go through the main port, create an opening in the Schlemm's canal like this. This is a small 25 gauge sharp knife. We are opening a Schlemm's canal over there. And once that is done, with a gonio mirror in place, hold the suture and cannulate the whole 360 degrees with it. It comes out from the other end. There is obviously a learning curve. So the Schlemm's canal cannulation is confirmed once you have the egress of blood through it. It has come from the other end. You just hold it, pull it apart. The whole of the 360 degrees angle opens up, and the resistance at the angle which was blocking the flow of aqueous through it clears out and the pressures decrease. All throughout the surgery, there is no touching of anywhere on the conjunctiva. So all this area for a future surgery is preserved. You can see this blanching of these areas over here. That is the sign that the fluid is actually now filtering from there and getting absorbed. So this is one small video which I wanted to show. This is, I hope, will revolutionize how the glaucoma is treated in India. It has always been trabeculectomy, trabeculectomy, trabeculectomy. The only narrative was Indians cannot afford expensive MIGS. Now this is possibly one of those ways that we can give the benefit of MIGS to Indians also. The cost of surgery comes down to hardly 25,000 or so, which many of the Indians can afford. The other thing which I had talked about, share it. 1 second, I just open and share. The presentation will not much of a sense. I'll just show you the video. 1 second, I'll just pause it and share. So rest of the setting remains very, very similar to what a ophthalmologist works. It's on a slit lamp mounted. Patient's positions his chin on his slit lamp, and we, using a special gonio lens, focus on the various parts of the angles and use this aiming beam. This red beam is actually a aiming beam. So it's very simple. This is no difficult procedure at all. It's a wide beam. You just have to place it on the angle structures, and one width beam apart, keep giving around 100 shots all throughout the 360 degrees. So you can see a small bubble formations over there. Those are called champagne bubbles. This is an indication that the laser is working well. If you don't get those bubbles, we increase the energy. Every person's pigmentation varies. Some have light pigmentation, some have dark pigmentation, so the energies can vary. Whole of this procedure takes only 10 to 12 minutes. OPD procedure, walk-in, walk-out procedure. This gives a good IOP reduction in a relatively new glaucoma patient, not in a patient who has 80% damage, 90% damage. It doesn't work. This works in a newly diagnosed patient. That is where the emphasis of detecting the patient at the earlier stage. If we know who these patients are at risk of developing glaucoma, we can guide them for detection of glaucoma at an earlier stage. They can get benefited by this rather than see this disease, glaucoma. Why my heart aches for this is whatever damage happens is permanent. There is no reversal whatsoever. If you are getting detected a glaucoma at 30% damage, you have to live with that 30% damage. And it can only get worse with time. It cannot get better. With the best of the treatment modalities, we can try and reduce the progression, but we cannot totally halt, because one of the factors which is responsible for progression is the aging, which cannot be arrested. So the rest of the other factors, which is the control of the pressure and the other parameters, we try and address it. Still, we in some cases cannot arrest total progression. That is why the emphasis is on earlier detection. Most of my patients whom we have done either laser or surgery or even medical management in early cases, they do not face any problem as far as the vision field constriction is concerned for the rest of the life. But because it is symptomless, patients come to know only when the damage progresses and comes as a tunnel vision. That is where then we identify, oh, now patient is not able to see. Patient should go and visit a ophthalmologist. I always try and address all my patients, all my colleagues, that whatever regular eye checkup that we go to an optometrist or an optical shop and do should be done at a general ophthalmologist. I do not emphasize on getting an eye checkup done for glaucoma from a glaucoma specialist. Glaucoma specialist role comes only once there is glaucoma which requires intervention. The rest of the treatment, everything is very, very simple. I do not want to create it as my arena of work. It is not. An ophthalmologist can detect a glaucoma, and patients who require interventions, surgeries, advanced these things, those they refer to us. But idea is to educate patient that if you are having a glasses, you are at higher risk of glaucoma. Rather than getting those glasses checked and changed at an optical store, go to an eye clinic, get your complete eye checkup, and then change your glasses. The WHO recommends that after the age of 40 years, every 2 years, once you should get your eyes checkup done. Comprehensive eye checkup is the word that they use, which includes glass number, the pressure checkup, the retina checkup, and everything. Now, all this diabetic retinopathy, macular degeneration, everything is monitored by a general ophthalmologist. Only when there comes in role of surgery or role of injection or role of lasers, where the specialists come into picture. Imagine diabetic population of the whole India start running to retina specialists. There aren't any. How many retina specialists will be able to cater to the diabetic population? You can't. So it is about stratification. You have a problem which requires a treatment by a retina specialist or a glaucoma specialist, you go to them. Identifying who requires what is what is difficult in India, because this has not gone through proper channels as of now. Government of India is still stuck on blindness prevention only on cataract. 80% of blindness is cataract, but it is 100% recoverable. You operate cataract and you're fine, absolutely fine. There is no residual damage. Retinal conditions, glaucoma conditions, irreversible damages. That is where the emphasis should have been, but because it doesn't address the political or the election related agenda, this is still weak. Efforts are always on, but we do not get Amitabh Bachchan or Aishwarya Rai standing and campaigning for glaucoma. It is difficult because it cannot generate that much money to afford a celebrity like that. But a difference can be made by the medical fraternity. Educate the patient about a possible glaucoma, at least when there is family history, when there is diabetes, and when they are wearing glasses. If they are motivated to go to an eye checkup from a doctor, most of the things will fall into place and they will be in the scheme of treatment. That is one thing which I want to drive the message across. So regarding anything in glaucoma, if you have any doubts.
Any questions before you wind up?
Ocular Society will take this up in very major way.
They are, but what?
See, we are not seeing this happening in the theaters and all, and actually all is going now. Theaters have opened up. It's a small film, we could make efforts to see that it screens in all the theaters and awareness is created.
See, every year we have a Glaucoma Society of India. Every year a charter is sent to the government of India. These are the steps of awareness that we require. Last year on World Glaucoma Week Day, the Calcutta Bridge, full of it was lighted in the symbol of glaucoma. But that's only one thing. None of the other things happened. Why don't we have a small 5 minutes message or a 2 minutes message on a national DD network? No, it doesn't happen. But still, things take time in India. We are hopeful that things will get better. But as a primary care provider, a medical fraternity can drive this message across to a lot of population. That is what we are relying on. Every month we do activities of skill development amongst general ophthalmologists. How do you detect more glaucoma? How do you treat glaucoma? None of the glaucoma specialists want the glaucoma to be kept to themselves. We want more awareness, because what happens by the time the patient comes into my clinic, it is already gone and I cannot help him much. It is such a pathetic scenario that he has come, he is wanting for a treatment and I cannot give any treatment. So this is the scenario which we intend to change. We do a lot of periphery of Mumbai, periphery of Maharashtra, workshops and skill transfer trainings. So awareness amongst ophthalmologists has increased now in the last 10 years, a lot. Earlier, you may even know stalwarts who say, if you have glaucoma, you will go blind. Whether you want to do treatment, do or don't do, you will go blind. So those problems are also there. But slowly, now they are open towards treatment of glaucoma, treatment, follow-up of glaucoma. That is the main challenge, that everyone recognizes this as a potential threat. It is estimated, like the diabetic capital of world, India is going to be the glaucoma capital of the whole world. 25% of the glaucoma cases will very soon be from India. Now it ranks close to diabetic retinopathy. Diabetic blindness and glaucoma related blindness is 13 and 14 million. So they are close to each other. Diabetic, most of the conditions you treat and you recover vision in most cases, unless it is burnt out diabetes. But in glaucoma, we do not recover, and that is why the emphasis identify at an early stage. See, I'll come down to basic. The normal eye pressure is supposed to be 10 to 21. If the pressures are going to be normal, even if you put drops there, it is not going to further reduce it and increase the chance of not getting glaucoma. It doesn't work that way. Only if that pressure is sufficient enough to damage your nerve and then you decrease the pressure, it can halt it. irrespective, see, all the medications. Now, if I tell you, you take beta blocker, you will not develop hypertension and you will not develop a heart disease. That's not true. There are so many side effects of a systemic beta blocker. You cannot put the whole population on a beta blocker. Same way, all glaucoma medications come with side effect. They have to be handled with care. And that's why we do not recommend any glaucoma medications without proper workup. See, the burden is for life. I see every month, I see minimum 20 patients whom I stop treatment. So it has been started where not indicated. So India is a country of underdiagnosed glaucoma and over treatment. Okay. Problem is not treatment. Problem, many treatments are done, but whether it is indicated, whether it is required, has to be carefully worked out. Imagine a 30 or a 40-year-old male having to live with a burden that, oh, I have glaucoma, I have to put medications and follow up for the rest of my life when he doesn't have. So that's also wrong. You cannot falsely put the patient a label of a glaucoma, which is a lifelong condition. It is not a condition which is there for 6 months or a year. So it's not correct that way. Similarly, there's no preventive treatment for glaucoma. Only preventive treatment I could say is that if you have risk factors, please get your eyes checked regularly, at least once in 2 years after the age of 40 years and once in a year after the age of 60 years. This is the WHO guidelines. Everyone should do it. And once this is done by an ophthalmologist, he will identify all the possible risk factors for you, whether you are at risk of glaucoma, whether you are at risk of having diabetic retinopathy, do you have any macular degeneration, do you have any other condition, all of that can be identified by that. But if you don't give an opportunity for those diseases to be picked, then we are the losers for ourselves. Today, for one eye clinic, you will have 50 optical stores around. People flock there, get their numbers checked, and year on year they keep following over there without knowing about their eye health. What they know is only the spectacle health. So this is most important, which I want to drive it again.
Thank you for the wonderful talk. And maybe we could also request you to write a small article of public awareness for our magazine. We have KMA Vision. So we can create more awareness amongst all other doctors also who are here. And with this, we end today's first hybrid CME, where part of us were here, the speakers were here, and there were almost more than 75 delegates attending from across Maharashtra. And I would definitely love to know your feedback about whether you want such hybrid events to continue or Zoom is the way to go. So please do drop in a message and let us know how you feel about it. And with this, we end today's session, and we request all of you all to kindly join us in the lounge for some high tea. Thank you very much.